are these people?
Time for Fuck Israel. Reeve said that I should actually ask Jesse Jet to make me a Fuck Israel little intro vignette thing so that I can play that every time he had started to do some lounge music. I wasn't thrilled with that, but it would be funny to have something because we do have to do this segment every week. And I've got a few things that are just absolutely fucking horrific. So we'll start with Professor Assal Rod. She's outstanding independent journalist as well. She loves to correct the headlines in corporate media. And apparently the orders went out last week. And we're going to talk a little bit about this story. But Israeli forces kill 2 Palestinians after they appear to surrender. And there was a lot of coverage about this. I'm pretty sure I brought an article that actually details what happened here. This was in Jenin in the West Bank. Remember, there's no Hamas here. This is the West Bank. So they surrendered. You could see the video clearly. They have their hands in the air. Soldiers are behind them. They kick them, and then they shoot them in the back, and they kill them. But the orders went out to corporate media, but for some reason they appeared to surrender. They didn't appear to surrender. No, they fucking surrendered. But somehow Reuters, the BBC, the New York Times, they all, for some reason, it appeared to surrender. WAPO too. Fuck all you guys. This is why corporate media is garbage. Right? To cast doubt. 2 Palestinians were executed in Jenin this morning. All right. After surrendering, none of the soldiers flinched. Business as usual. Here it is. They order them to get back under the thing. And as they're climbing back under, they shoot them. Then they put their hands up like, what do you mean? What happened? Then they use their heavy equipment to pull the door right down on top of them, just in case they weren't already dead. And there's still guns drawn as if these guys are going to pop up and shoot them. Out of their fucking minds, these people. Unspooled. All right. Fuck Israel. All right. But on top of that, this is one you probably didn't hear. The IDF also murdered 2 kids in Younis. That's in Gaza. That's inside Gaza. Wait, isn't there supposed to be a ceasefire happening? Huh? The Israeli army continued its violations of the declared ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, killing 2 Palestinian siblings, both are children, and bombarding several areas of the devastated coastal enclave. Medical sources in Bani Sohelia, east of Khan Younis, reported that Israeli forces opened heavy fire on displaced Palestinians, killing 2 children instantly. But if there was a ceasefire, how could they open heavy fire? Oh, right, because they don't really adhere to a ceasefire. Sources confirmed that the victims were among families who had already fled earlier bombardments and were sheltering in makeshift tents, because everybody was. The 2 slain children have been identified as Tamer and Bis' brother Tamer and his brother Tamer Abu Aasi. They were killed near the Al-Farabi school in Bani Sohelia. I saw Mossab Abu Toha also share this. The Israeli Air Force also launched massive missile strikes while artillery units fired shells at neighborhoods east of Khan Younis. But again, ceasefire, right, guys? In addition, Israeli Navy vessels opened fire on displaced Palestinians near the shore of Rafah, Gaza's southernmost city. Why? Forcing hundreds to scatter from the beaches where they had sought refuge. And we saw the tents lined up on the beaches. Civil defense crews reported difficulty reaching the wounded due to the ongoing shelling and destruction of access roads. Well, that makes sense. Local rights groups condemned the attacks as part of a systemic campaign to terrorize displaced civilians, noting that the strikes deliberately targeted areas known to be overcrowded with families who'd already lost their homes. Since the quote-unquote ceasefire was announced on October 11th, and this is why I brought this, Israeli forces have murdered 354 Palestinians and injured another 900 others almost, while rescue teams have recovered 605 bodies from beneath the rubble of destroyed buildings. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza, Al Jazeera and English and Arabic and independent outlets and human rights groups, the overall toll of the genocide in Gaza has been deeply minimized and reached at least 69,733 Palestinians killed and more than 170,863 Palestinians injured, the majority of whom are children and women. Except we know both of those numbers are substantially higher, like in the hundreds of thousands higher. Thousands remain missing under collapsed buildings, with civil defense crews warning that the true number of victims is likely even higher by a lot. On top of the mass graves, on top of the 10,000 Palestinian hostages, yes, hostages, that Israel is holding prisoner without charge somewhere in a torture camp. Fuck Israel. All right, now we're also going to go back to Indie Media Award honoree Popular Resistance. This one is no surprise, but also no less disgusting. From the Adala Legal Center, okay, that over 30 new laws have been enacted since October 7th to further entrench apartheid. Over the past 2 years, the Israeli Knesset has passed dozens of new laws, the cumulative effect of which is to further entrench and deepen Israel's regime of apartheid and repression over all Palestinians under its control, both in Israel, and in the occupied territories. All of Israel is the occupied territory, but that's another story. Adala's new report, okay, what a surprise. We're now getting hiccups on bandwidth, I see. Great. Adala's new report, post 7th October, a new wave of anti-Palestinian Israeli laws, reviews key legislation passed between October 7th, 2023 and July 27th of this year. The laws span multiple themes, including freedom of expression, protest and thought, the right to citizenship and family life, equality and social rights, and the rights of detainees and prisoners, which we know Israel believes they have none. These new laws fundamentally violate the human rights of Palestinians, yet nobody in the international community says or does shit. While the state has legitimized these new laws by the wartime political climate that they created, that they invented, this legislation is rooted in Israel's constitutional structure based on Jewish ethno-national supremacy, which in many instances amounts to separate legal systems for Jewish Israelis and Palestinians. That's apartheid. The laws reflect and are the manifestation of the 2018 Basic Law, Jewish nation state. This is, as this new government declared in its guiding principles, quote, so disgusting, the Jewish people have an exclusive and inalienable right over all areas of the land of Israel, unquote. Sounds genocidal to me. Since October 7th, 2023, Israeli authorities have used the war, quote unquote, again, it's not a war with no, if they're not fighting back, to accelerate these trends and consolidate Jewish ethno-national supremacy on a broader scale. This new report builds on Adala's October 2024 position paper, which reviewed 8 bills, most of which were later enacted into laws. What a surprise. the laws were covered in these reports to join the laws already documented in Adalah's discriminatory laws database, bringing the total to about 100 discriminatory laws. Imagine in this country if there were 100 laws on the books right now that were discriminatory against Native Americans. Because that's the comparison you need to draw here, where we've stolen their land, pushed them further and further into smaller places, and then said that they can't operate in XYZ. And I guarantee you, Inhumans of late-stage capitalism is probably screaming at their computer at me right now, going, that's exactly what they fucking done. They freed Leonard Peltier earlier this year, but that is exactly what they fucking done. But imagine that in 2025, we were passing new laws to further persecute and create an apartheid state against Native Americans who have their poor community outside of the casinos and the land that they own, but they're not doing well financially compared to the rest of a lot of other communities. So to go after them, why? Like, it's either racism, it's punitive, it's bullying, it's imperialistic, and it's disgusting in every way, shape, and form. The report identifies key legislative trends. First, it documents the new amendments and the expanded use of the counterterrorism framework, which in practice is applied almost exclusively to Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem. Except we've seen all of the Israeli residents that have the settlers that have terrorized Issa Amro's house, for example, that have gone through the streets with pogroms led by Ben Gvir and terrorized Palestinians living there. The vague definitions of terrorist act, quote unquote, and terror organization in the 2016 counterterrorism law and the subsequent amendments have become key tools for suppressing Palestinians' freedom of expression, especially since October of 2023. Another trend channels enormous state resources for Jewish Israeli reservists into new privileges, tax, welfare, higher education, employment benefits that by their nature exclude Palestinian citizens of Israel. The report also, and again, why there's any Palestinians that would want to live peacefully alongside Israelis in that land where they're already given second-class status. They're not actually given citizenship. They're not given right of return. They're just allowed to live there until the IDF decides they want to take their house. The report also highlights the institutionalization of temporary emergency measures, repeatedly renewed or made permanent, enabling widespread violations of detainees' rights and punitive conditions against Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli custody. Why are we tolerating this? Why is the world tolerating this? Well, this was never the plan. At least I didn't think that was the plan. Right? The report also concludes that the Israeli legislature is consolidating a dual legal regime that privileges Jewish Israelis while systematically violating Palestinians' rights. However, unlike historical systems of racial or religious supremacy, such as the apartheid South Africa or Jim Crow South in the U.S., most of the Israeli laws cited in the report use neutral legal language. Their legislative history and application, however, demonstrate the systematic targeting of Palestinians. So it can be applied universally if they want to, but they're only applying it to Palestinians. These laws criminalize legitimate political expression, authorize deportations of Palestinian families to where I don't know, block Palestinian family unification, permit the dismissal of Palestinian teachers, revoke Palestinian families' social welfare benefits if their minor children are convicted of what's characterized as security offenses. Of course, Israel gets to determine what those offenses are and if they committed them unilaterally with no trial or any kind of process, including stone throwing. Against a soldier that's holding an assault rifle. Expand detention powers and prolong detention. Restrict access to legal counsel and close independent media outlets, because God forbid anybody got the real story out, right? They violate both Israel's constitutional principles, not that they actually care, and its obligations under international treaties, which they also don't care about, and other countries aren't holding them accountable to. In the occupied Palestinian territory, they further breach Israel's duties under international humanitarian law because they are responsible for the welfare, well-being, and health of the Palestinian people in those territories as well. It's wow. The report references that July 2024 International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which found that Israel's prolonged occupation is illegal and that discriminatory legislation constitutes a breach of the prohibition on racial segregation and apartheid under Article 3 of the International Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the CERD. All right. I thought Israel had signed off on that, but you can wipe your ass with the treaties that they've actually signed off on and agreed to, because they're not adhering to any of it. And again, there's no accountability for it. There should be a full blockade of Israel right now, because they're already doing it to the Palestinian people. Why should it help? Why should the Israeli people be able to have goods flow freely? It also situates these new laws within Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza, including measures restricting UNRWA operations and humanitarian aid, directly violating the ICJ's provisional measures in the South Africa v. Israel case. And we saw that the guy who used to run the IDF, who used to run Unit 8200, he admitted that he had done like a blackmail for hire. I mean, a campaign, a smear campaign coordinated against the ICJ. Other laws, such as the Unlawful Combatants Law, enable arbitrary detention and enforce disappearances, contributing to the systematic repression of Palestinians detained in Israel from Gaza. The closure of media outlets, again, such as Al Jazeera, serves to conceal atrocities and prevent scrutiny of state violence, and allow them to control the narrative. Adalah also documents additional pending bills, many of which are currently before the Knesset in its session that began at the end of October, that would even further erode democratic participation and equality. They're just ripping the mask off. There's nothing democratic about them, except what they call themselves. These pending bills would expand the grounds for disqualifying Arab Knesset parties and candidates, bar the employment of teachers holding degrees from Palestinian academic institutions. They'd be able to dismiss university staff based on political views. That's already happening here. Fuck Israel for that. Entrench West Bank annexation through jurisdictional changes. Fuck that. And tax foreign government funding to human rights NGOs, among others, which further discourages human rights NGOs from funding this stuff. A separate bill, and Reef and Colin covered this a couple of weeks ago on INN News, mandates the death penalty for killing an Israeli citizen out of, quote, racism or hostility toward the public, unquote, aiming to harm the state of Israel and the revival of the Jewish people in its homeland, unquote, even if it's your homeland first that they're stealing. Taken together, these legislative initiatives reveal that this Israeli government and parliament continue to act in defiance of the state's constitutional commitments and international law, whatever that means, reinforcing a regime of apartheid and deepening the denial of Palestinian collective and individual rights. Netanyahu does not want to acknowledge that a Palestinian even exists. So yeah, agreed with all of that. Fuck Israel. I also brought an article from another Indie Media Award honoree, Ricky, over at Council Estate Media. Okay. Google Trends. Now, this one's crazy. Now, I don't know if everybody was paying attention to what was going on during the holidays, but there was this DC shooter, an Afghani guy shot two National Guardsmen in DC, one of whom ended up dying. And turns out he had worked with CIA in Afghanistan when he was a teenager. They had brought him here, and there was a lot of smoke there. But here's the thing. This is weird. Google Trends for DC and Tel Aviv expose another CIA Mossad assassination? What? In a weird coincidence, Google data shows that someone searched for Ramanullah Lakanwal before he carried out the shooting of two National Guardsmen in DC on November 26th. How is that possible? The below data shows that on November 25th, there was a spike in searches in the District of Columbia, where DC is located. There were smaller numbers of searches the following day. And again, that's the 26th. But why were people searching here and here on the 25th for his name? That's not exactly a popular name. These figures don't show the number of searches performed, but rather a popularity score assigned by Google from 0 to 100. The spike prior to the shooting was given the maximum score of 100 right there. Interestingly, there's a similar spike from Israel, I wonder why, with a score of just over 50. Again, that's before the shooting happened. You might think, and that's a great song by the Cars, but you might think it's crazy. All I want is you. You might think this is perfectly normal search activity, but you would be wrong. Long-term searches show no data, scores of 0 for months or years at a time, and then sudden spikes with scores of 100. For example, we found spikes in Israel and the UK around the same time in 2023 and 2024. Remember, these things can be planned way in advance, and they can involve multiple intelligence agencies. Here's a sudden spike on the 16th of October in the UK. Again, that's the guy. Why are they searching this guy on October 16th in the UK? Like, to the point that it's causing a 100 level interest from Google. Here's a spike from Australia on the 27th of October. Now, it could be that somebody was using a VPN and setting this guy up. But it seems like there's more than one person here. The Twitter thread shows multiple users sharing their findings in the comments, corroborating the above. You might think this is just conspiracy theory nonsense and nothing to see here, right? Well, you're kind of right, because Google memory holded and has erased most of the search data. Because they usually do that, right? The search function is up and running for long-term data for any location over the past 5 years, but many of the spikes are gone. Some of the older results are still showing. It's worth noting that some social media users made screen recordings of their searches because they suspected this would happen and didn't want to be accused of fakery. I can name one specifically who got allegedly fired by Breaking Points this week. That's James Lee from the 5149 podcast. Google Trends currently shows isolated spikes in the UK and Israel in both 2023 and 2024 at around the same times. That's weird. It then shows nothing until after the shooting, apart from a spike in Israel from July of 2025 with a score of 100. Why would Israel know anything about this cat? However, we know that there were more spikes in the US, UK, Israel, and Australia. Perhaps the older results are just a coincidence. It's hard to say, but it's hard to dismiss the recent hidden results as mere coincidence. If you search the past 7 days for, say, District of Columbia or Tel Aviv, you'll get the above error message. Try to search on Ramanullah Lochinwall and see what happens. A worldwide search now shows 0 records for him prior to the killing. Weird, huh? It's almost like what happened with Charlie Kirk in a way, but he was famous, so he was being searched over time. You didn't have a 0 and then a spike to 100 the minute it happened and then interest falling off the way that it would normally trend. But you saw these things above. That's real. Those things were really there. People were searching Google Trends to see if people were searching for these terms, and it turns out they were. If you're still unconvinced, just look at the below. Yes, that's one of the victims, Sarah Beckstrom, being searched in Tel Aviv prior to the shooting. Why would that be? Why would that be? 100 spiked interest well prior. That's November 23rd. It was before that. Thanksgiving's the 26th. Now, if vanishing Google spikes were the only weirdness around the case, you might argue that more evidence is needed. Evidence such as the shooter's ties to CIA. Well, our CIA director, John Ratfuck, a.k.a. Ratcliffe, cites that the alleged guard shooter's ties to CIA and other U.S. agencies in Afghanistan. Oops. He also has ties to the armed forces, Kandahar Strike Force. This card holder is working in conjunction with Afghan and U.S. armed forces for a question called Firebase Gecko, and there's the number. Turns out, Ramanullah Lochinwall is a veteran of the CIA-trained and funded Kandahar Strike Force, a 0 unit, aka Afghan paramilitary force, that's been accused of human rights violations and of killing civilians. He served alongside U.S. forces for 10 years and was granted asylum in the U.S. in 2021. Given that he's 29, he must have been no more than 15 when he was recruited. Despite working as an Amazon delivery driver, Lochinwall was living in a $2,000 a month apartment in Bellingham, Washington, with his wife and 5 kids. If she's working, it's possible for them to be able to afford a $2,000 a month apartment, I would assume. Right? I cannot believe that he might do this. This sounds like MK Ultra kind of shit in a way. Lochinwall reportedly yelled Allahu Akbar while carrying out the DC shooting. Was that what his handlers told him he had to do? It's kind of like a Tyler Robinson transgender girlfriend Antifa bullets thing. It conveniently just fits a narrative. And Americans are pushing that narrative hard. Just look at this clip from our Department of War Secretary, Whiskey Pete Hegseth. The victims were the best of America who love their fellow Americans. And the shooting happened just steps away from the White House. Oh my God, clutch my pearls. And that was a narrative, by the way, that just steps away from the White House was blanketed across that whole media sphere. Hegseth talks of deploying 500 additional National Guards. He's such a pussy. And entering other cities and of Christian values. And then he pivots to counter cartel effort and narco terrorists and peace through strength. It's all about using fear and grief to justify fascism. I'm not even going to play his nonsense drivel. He doesn't get to speak here. You have influencers like Laura Loomer, declaring that the U.S. is at war with Islam, calling for every mosque to be raided and for mass deportations of Muslims. You know, we're supposed to have both freedom of religion and freedom from religion in this country, Laura. There we go. There's one. Elon Musk argued that calling someone a fascist should be considered incitement to murder. The Trump administration calls nonviolent people terrorists and then kidnaps or murders them, but that apparently is fine if they're Venezuelan. Right? And what's even funnier is the whole fascist thing. When Mamdani was at the White House, Trump said to him, some reporter asked him, well, how do you square calling him a fascist? Do you still think he's a fascist? And Trump, who's sitting down, looks up and goes, it's all right. You can answer. You can call me a fascist. It's fine. Funniest thing I saw all week, honestly. Trump really is very funny. I can't stand him, but he's very funny. Trump is now talking of restricting immigration from the Middle East and has described immigrants as the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. He plans to examine every Afghan immigrant and send those who don't belong here back to Afghanistan, where the Taliban will surely kill them for assisting the U.S. during the war. Some of us predicted there would be false flags to push the fascist agenda, but you didn't have to be Nostradamus to see this one coming because they kept telling us attacks were imminent, like they had a crystal ball. And they really must have had a crystal ball because not only did their Google searches show prior knowledge of the DC shooting, but also the Charlie Kirk shooting. In the recent days before Charlie Kirk was killed, there were all kinds of weird searches related to the alleged shooter and the hospitals and doctors in the area. To be clear, we're talking about sudden spikes on terms which previously had no search data. Supporters of Trump and Netanyahu need to understand that these men, have no loyalties and will hurt or kill anyone to further their fascist agenda. Wait, there we go. I missed one thing. Yep. Most of the spikes, came from Washington and Tel Aviv. No. And then, of course, that backs up to the Twitter data that showed when the NSA? Where were they? Where were they housed? Tel Aviv, right? And then they hid the country data till it was fixed and changed to the United States. Then they restricted country data on certain agencies. Like, guys, you're just screaming the quiet parts out loud. Now, I brought one other article from Professor David Miller. It's really long. And this is from back in September, he wrote this. And I caught this on the IsraelPalestineNews.org website that republished it yesterday. And this is an article that documents all of the different methods and areas of Zionist infiltration in order to penetrate and influence an entire society to ensure that their agenda gets passed, pushed, and comes out on top. And I thought it was fascinating. And I wanted to bring it and skim through it. And I'll link it in the description afterwards on Substack. Okay. What is the function of the Zionist movement? Well, let's start with 4 statements that together define what the Zionist movement does by adding its functions cumulatively. 1, the Zionist movement creates and sustains the Israel lobby to extend its ideological and political reach, shaping both foreign and domestic policy in the countries where it operates, which is just about everywhere. It provides material support for ethnic cleansing and genocide, funneling millions each year through charities that aid in land theft and war crimes. It grooms children and youth into ideological loyalists through a vast network of schools, synagogues, youth groups, and settler recruitment programs, including birthright tours, the Massa Journey, and the Lone Soldier Program. Beyond all of this, the movement systematically dispatches its adherents into broader society as lifelong agents of Zionist ideology. This is not a metaphor. It is infiltration. This concept of infiltration extends beyond the traditional intelligence model of recruiting agents for covert missions, though that too remains a part of it. Think Epstein. It also involves utilizing individuals who are, in a sense, sleeper agents ready to be activated. That's the Zionim. We talked about that and even references it. It was Professor David Miller who wrote that article that I read last summer about them. But it's even more than that, in the sense that in many cases, the sleepers don't even need an actual tap on the shoulder to partake in a particular mission. They're already primed to act when the interests of the so-called Jewish state are threatened, quote unquote, or even merely perceived or imagined to be. They're primed by their often decades-long experience of radicalization and grooming to become believing ideological Zionists. I know I'm related to some. In other words, this is a multifaceted and profound level of infiltration cultivated from childhood and reinforced throughout every stage of life. To understand how such a system came into being, we must first go back and examine the origins and evolutions of the Zionist movement itself. So this starts, again, prior to 1948, because this, again, did not start in 1948. Even the most hardline Zionists and the most revolutionary socialists agree on one point. Prior to 1948, the Zionist movement functioned as a coordinated political force. It organized and executed the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing and mass displacement of Palestinians, in order to establish what it called the State of Israel. Zionists, of course, reject this terminology, but the historical record is clear. With its primary objective achieved in 1948, the movement briefly considered dissolving. However, at the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem in 1951, delegates chose to continue and redefine new goals for the future. This led to the creation of the Jerusalem Program, which formally codified the movement's new objectives. Alongside it, the Israeli parliament enacted the World Zionist Organization Jewish Agency Status Law to govern the relationship between the State of Israel and the Zionist movement. That law remains in effect today, shaping the global Zionist movement's operations and responsibilities. Bet you didn't know that, because I didn't before I read this. At the World Zionist Congress held in Jerusalem on September 24th, 1951, the movement faced a crossroads. Again, this was about whether to go forward or disband. But, with new goals in practice by a vote of 286-0, with the remaining 438 delegates abstaining. So it wasn't a majority. But the ones that didn't vote just didn't vote. So you got a unanimous quote-unquote vote. But there were over 700 delegates, most of which abstained. The ones who voted yes to continue. David Ben-Gurion speaks at the 51 World Zionist Congress. They adopted the new set of objectives to reorient the movement. These were defined as the strengthening of the State of Israel, the ingathering of the exiles in Eretz Yisrael. They want to grab all the Jews from outside and bring them in, and the fostering of the unity of the Jewish people. They wanted to make it insular so that there was nowhere else safe in the world for Jews to live. That's the narrative that they were using to push all Jews toward Israel at the time, to give it legitimacy. This movement marked the transformation of Zionism from a settler colonial movement into a global ideological infrastructure. It was no longer about just building a state. It was about embedding that state into the hearts, minds, and institutions of Jews worldwide, to the point where every Jew in America from the time I grew up in the 70s and 80s were taught that you have, this is your home, your second home. It's not my home. It's never been my home. I never felt at home. I never considered it to be my home. I don't feel welcome there, and I don't want to ever be there or ever go there again. I have no interest in that. But I have more rights to the land there than people that spent their entire lives there right now. It's disgraceful. So at the time, the law passed by the Knesset to formalize that relationship, all right, spelled out the obligations of both parties and designated the World Zionist Organization as the authorized body responsible for developing and settling the land, absorbing immigrants from the diaspora, and coordinating the work of Jewish institutions operating within Israel. Now that Zionists of America is a spinoff of the World Jewish Congress, by the way. It still exists today. Talked to Gen X Girl about that earlier this year. Crucially, the law affirmed that the state of Israel expects the cooperation of all Jews as individuals and groups in building up the state. That's why they call us self-hating Jews if we're against this. Because they have to alienate anyone that's not on board with their little fucking ethno-state project. Fuck these assholes. It further stipulated that the World Zionist Organization requires full cooperation, again, in its coordination, right? To that end, the law mandated the creation of a formal committee to coordinate activities between the Israeli government and the Zionist movement's executive leadership. Well, wouldn't that give like an ethno-state apartheid kind of a leg up and unfair advantage over everybody else in this quote-unquote democracy that you just created? In other words, the State of Israel and the World Zionist Organization, as a matter of law, are required to work together, and also as expressed in law, both bodies expect the cooperation of all Jews. How are they to fucking write a law of what Jews in America can do? Fuck these people so hard. The extent to which this expectation is met remains an empirical question. It should be. So, among these are, again, the preservation of Jewish unity and enduring the bond to Eretz Yisrael. Fuck these assholes. All right. The duties of the individual Zionists. So what they did was they decided to come up with like a set of laws or a set of a code. Here's what we expect from you as a Jewish individual, even in another country. From 1972. Among these were the call to make Aliyah, that is, to become a settler colonialist in occupied Palestine. Others included joining local Zionist federations or affiliated groups, actively promoting the movement's ideological program, and ensuring children receive Zionist, Hebrew, and Jewish education designed to reinforce loyalty to Israel. Zionists were also expected to donate financially through established channels such as Karen Hayesod, the Jewish National Fund, or their local branches in order to consolidate Israel's economy and fund its expansionist aims, and also give it lobbying power. With the exception of physically becoming a settler colonialist, all of these duties amount to an explicit call for infiltration of host societies. Perhaps the most direct duty, however, is to strengthen Zionist influence within the community. This likely refers to the Jewish community rather than broader society, but even so, it's still a call to expand the influence of Zionism on society as a whole. Again, fuck Israel. Right, more like the Jerusalem pogrom. Yes, that's right. Go start over on Rumble. Okay, one might reasonably ask, how much attention ordinary Zionists pay to such calls? Are these dry, dead words left to gather dust in the central Zionist archives in Al-Quds? Or do they still animate the central activities of the movement today? Well, let us take a look. Here's a 1961 report from the Jewish Chronicle about a Zionist meeting in Glasgow, which came to hand as I was writing this. I present it as an example of the movement's thinking and practical activities. The meeting was specifically designed as an educational Zionist event and expounded a particular set of ideas. Okay, this is about educating diaspora children as Jews, right? And this is, the minutes say, outlining a practical program for bringing up children as Jews, Dr. Simon declared that this would have to start with the education of expectant Jewish mothers and fathers at child guidance clinics. As a result of this, children from their earliest years would be reared in an atmosphere where they would see all the symbols and customs of Jewish life observed. This would then be followed by the children being sent to a Jewish or Hebrew kindergarten and then to a Jewish day school. They're isolationists. Another important part of the program, Dr. Simon went on, would be the creation of a Jewish resurgence. In this connection, however, it was an unfortunate something for Anglo Jewry when people, it's cutting off the book. Like Rabbi Dr. Alexander Altman fled the country at a time when there was so much need of him to be here. There was also a vital need for a planned Jewish adult education program, said this Dr. Simon. All right. The adults did not education, information that they would accept, but education they refused, which is weird. But again, it's indoctrination. It's not education. Oh, here. He's got it right there. All right. The measures which would be taken if the children in the diaspora were to remain Jews were discussed by Professor Ernest Simon of the Hebrew University, where he gave an address at a meeting held in the Central Hotel last week in connection with the Zionist Federation's Education Fortnight. All right. Yeah, creation of a Jewish resurgence. That's what that word was up there, resurgence. Okay. In this view, Zionist education required that children remain Jewish, making Jewish education crucial for the movement, indoctrination, and isolation the entire time. All right. And again, going back to the British Zionist Federation founded Scotland's first and only Jewish school, Calderwood Lodge. Is that commitment to inoculating Zionism still present today? It certainly is. Although Calderwood Lodge was taken over by the local authority in 1982, it remains a Zionist school today. It collaborates with the United Jewish Israel Appeal, Maccabee, Mitzvah Day, the Scottish Jewish Youth Alliance, and other Zionist groups. Gross. The UJIA is the UK outpost of one of Israel's 4 national institutions established to create and sustain the State of Israel. It serves as the UK affiliate of Keren HaYesod, which raises funds to finance settlement in Palestine. In its 2018-19 annual report, UJIA described its mission as developing a lifelong connection between Israel and the diaspora community, beginning with children as young as 4. Of 12 school programs run by UJIA, 9 are in primary schools, reaching thousands of pupils. Primary schools, like grade school. But that again, and so this again shows that lifelong connection. I wanted to show this graphic for that they have programs to support people of all ages and to introduce you to Jews of all ages is the idea. Zionists of all ages, but it's isolationist to Jews. But what's funny is the Christian Zionists all support this. Why? Because they want Jesus to come back, and according to all their scripture, the Jews have to control Israel. So therefore, they're doing all they can to try to make that happen. It's manufacturing it. And that's why the Torah Jews are so opposed to this. That's not how this is supposed to go down. Does it work? Well, varying statistics suggest that between 60 and 90% of British Jews identify as some sort of Zionist. So, yes, it's effective. Research by Pew in the U.S. in 2021, now that's dropped significantly since, but then 8 in 10 U.S. Jews say caring about Israel is an essential or important part of what being Jewish means to them. Nearly 6 in 10 say they personally feel an emotional attachment to Israel. That's complete indoctrination. Most of them have never been there or were there for a week or two, maybe. Most of them have never spent any significant time there, but yet they feel an emotional attachment and loyalty there? An essential part of what being... Why? Because they were brainwashed into it. Ultra-Zionists, I don't know the difference, often claim that even more Jews identify as Zionist. For example, the so-called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism conducted a survey in late 2023 that produced even higher figures that reportedly revealed that 97% of British Jews feel personally connected to events happening in Israel, which again is just a bunch of wishful thinking horse shit. 80% of respondents considered themselves to be a Zionist. Well, that alone is that they're preaching to a choir. Again, this is a really long article. Here are some of the infiltrators. Some within the movement consider the term infiltration outdated, arguing that it implies a deliberate Zionist strategy. Yet, this article has shown that such a strategy does exist. The question, however, is how conscious or deliberate it really is. The evidence suggests that there are different types of infiltration and different types of infiltrators. Okay, so he lays them out. We can begin with those directly or indirectly engaged in specific forms of infiltration on behalf of agencies to the Zionist entity, like the people that scream about pro-Israel stuff, for $7,000 a check. Their activities align more closely with the traditional sense of the term. From there, we turn to those with looser ties to the movement as a whole. In what follows, he outlines 6 types of infiltration. So you have, again, direct service to the Zionist entity. That's where they literally serve in the IDF, right? They delivered Mossad agents and weapons for subversion and assassination operations in Iran. That's the Ofer family. Another involves activities linked to Epstein, who gathered sexual compromat for Israeli intelligence. Not allegedly, he did. Mossad also relies on Sayanim. Again, we talked about this before. It's informal helpers abroad, most famously Robert Maxwell. Beyond this, there's thousands of Zionists working in the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and its predecessor, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Very kind of, generic terms. Their operations range from propaganda and lobbying to trolling, doxing, and lawfare. And there's, again, evidence of all this stuff documented. One such network is the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, which has nearly 1,000 members and operates in a joint venture with Voices of Israel, which is a company run by the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. In total, many thousands of Zionist groups are engaged in this form of activity. It's a massive spider web of activity. Then you have tech startups. Right? Unit 8200, using spyware like Celebrite, NICE, Toka, and the NSO group, maker of Pegasus. Right? Then you have covert use of this vast surveillance apparatus by the Zionist regime has been widely noted. Investigative reports have also shown that the significant numbers of Zionist infiltrators, including former occupation forces members, intelligence operators, and others, have secured senior positions across mainstream media and big tech. We've been covering that here at INN for years. Alan McLeod at Mintpress is famous for outing all the 8,200 people that work at Apple and at Facebook and Google and TikTok and everywhere else. And Meta and Microsoft even. All right, then you've got emissaries of the Zionist project. right? This is also a civilian equivalent of the Zionim, known as the Shlichim, or emissaries. That's like your Bill Ackmans, right? These emissaries are placed in schools and synagogues and JCCs, right? So you've got people like that. Then you've got Zionist family networks. And finally, you've got defending Zionism over the life course. Final form of infiltration is tied directly to the strategy of ensuring that all Jews make an enduring, lifelong commitment to Israel. As this article has shown, again, this has been central to the Zionist movement since at least 1951 and remains so today. Zionists expect all Jews to act on behalf of Israel whenever called upon, or whenever they perceive Zionist interests to be under threat. And I say, fuck Israel. And if they call on me, I'm going to say fuck Israel. Practically, this means service to Zionism through daily, professional, political, and social activities wherever Zionists find themselves. In the media, political parties, business, finance, schools, universities, civil society, including the left wing and so-called anti-racist organizations. Yes, they want to infiltrate, literally. It's just, wow. In other words, Zionists throughout the social structure are engaged in subversion and infiltration. One example is the Jewish network within the UK civil service. Although set up by the civil service itself, it is in practice run by and for Zionists rather than Jews. Similar patterns exist in universities, the media, the legal professional, finance, industry, and other institutions across society. All right. When the time comes for the proverbial tap on the shoulder, how many who've passed through Zionist indoctrination will fail to respond appropriately? I'm one of them. To ask the question is almost to invite disbelief. In many cases, no tap on the shoulder is even required. Across the BBC, the media, the entertainment world, civil service, politics, finance, and other commanding heights of society, there are already Zionists who are ideologically committed. And for them, it makes perfect sense to do the right thing when the moment arrives. The fact remains that the Zionist movement encourages loyalty to its ideology and its program of action, even when these run counter to the interests of the host state, or in all cases, to the interests of its citizenry. Right? Can we trust Zionists in the end? No. Do we imagine that they're not infiltrating the left, the Palestine solidarity movement, the anti-war movement? Zionism is at its core a racist ideology. No matter how hard liberals, socialists, or leftist Zionists try to disguise it, that racism always reveals itself, whether in adopting Zionist positions in their professional lives or in subverting and sabotaging pro-Palestine activism in political life. Are you hearing me, Zoran Mamdani? Yeah, I said it. This has historically meant that the anti-racist movement and the Palestine solidarity movement have been weak on the question of Zionism. It was a major mistake for the left in the UK and elsewhere not to confront Zionism head-on earlier. Today, we face a significant struggle to cleanse the left and the anti-imperialist movement of both Zionists and Zionist assumptions, ideas that have seeped out of the movement and into the consciousness of many non-Zionist or anti-Zionist socialist activists. This process has been underway for many decades. However, this isn't the place for a detailed analysis of the Jewish left or of Zionist penetration of the non-Jewish left. A fuller exposition will be needed in another article, but for now, it's enough to point to the need for a material and maximalist anti-Zionism. All right. Again, documenting more forms of infiltration today. He closes by saying, knowing your enemy is the first step toward defeating them and toward dislodging Zionism from its entrenched status and role across society. Yes, it was an interesting choice there to use that word cleanse. Well, they've been ethnically cleansing their land of anyone that opposes them, which means that they then they're going to try to do the same thing to anyone that is of that ideology. So they of course, in turn, must be cleansed. The Zogs set you up, Sean. Very funny, right? There's just so much here. David Miller, this is a great article. There's, again, even more here than I was able to go through. Follow him on Twitter at Tracking Power. He's also on Substack. Oh, I wanted to mention, by the way, that he was fired from University of Bristol. Getting back to this article all the way at the bottom here. Sorry to scroll and make you go blind. David Miller is a non-resident senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at the Istanbul Zaim University. But he is a former professor of political sociology at the University of Bristol. Again, fired for his anti-Zionism, for his pro-Palestine views. He's a broadcaster, he's a writer, and an investigative researcher. He's a producer of the weekly show Palestine Declassified on Press TV. And he's the co-director of the public interest investigations, of which spinwatch.org and powerbase.info are projects. So support David Miller. I appreciate his deep dive into exposing just how deep Zionism goes to infiltrate itself and to embed itself into all different areas of society so that they can make a phone call to, quote unquote, the right person, to an ally, to someone that will do their bidding for them when the time comes. Fuck Israel, by the way, one more time. We don't get remonetized by YouTube for that. Please support independent media. Cash App, $, Indie News Network. Ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. PayPal.me/Indie News Network. We're live over at IndieMediaToday.com over on Substack. INNewsletter.com is another newsletter that I publish there for the network that we're part of. And then IndieNewsNow.com. We're live there now. That's the name of the show. And that's because we made a website that aggregates all independent news from sources that we have vetted and determined to be highly credible, and serve that to you in an ad-free environment. But there's also a place to watch the media free. There's a place to support the media you want to see and keep the media free with a Stripe link. And there is a watch live, so you can watch this thing live and get merch. You can do that too. We'll be back next Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern for another Indie News Now Live. Subscribe to IndieMediaToday.com and you'll get clips emailed out to you all week. Support independent media because we need it more than ever, fam. I love you all. Have a good night, everyone. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want?